Around the world, people regularly go missing and in many cases are never found. In some missing cases, the circumstances of their disappearance is so unusual it is as if they have passed over into another dimension. The disappearing runner. In 1873, a shoemaker by the name of James Burn Worson of Leamington Spa in central England considered himself to be an excellent athlete. Worson made a bet with a few of his friends, telling them that he could run non-stop from Leamington Spa to Coventry, which was a distance of 16 miles, and then return the same way back to Leamington Spa. The problem with Worson was that every time he drank, which was often, he would regularly make outrageous bets. On this occasion, his friends accepted the bet. To ensure that their friend would not try to take any shortcuts, they followed closely behind him in a horse and cart. These men were a linen draper named Barham Wise and a photographer named Hammerson Burns. The date of his run was the 3rd of September, and for the first few miles James was progressing well until they heard him cry out and then trip over. But as he was falling towards the ground, his friends suddenly saw him completely vanish before he even hit the ground. Initially, they could not believe their eyes and walked around looking for their lost comrade, but without success. They hurriedly returned to town to report his disappearance to the police. The police were initially suspicious and suspected Wise and Burns of foul play, but after further investigation had to accept the men's testimony that James Burn Worson had somehow slipped on a rock and vanished into thin air. The vanishing prisoner. In 1815, in a Prussian prison in Danzig at Wishelmund, now modern Poland, the following event occurred in full view of witnesses. A prisoner by the name of Diderici was serving time as he had been charged with fraud for stealing his employer's identity when the employer had suddenly died from a stroke. Diderici was once the valet to Captain Fritz Alschwanger of the Prussian army and had assumed his identity and was living the life of a wealthy military man. One afternoon, as Diderici was walking in the prison yard with other prisoners, and were all chained together and standing in line preparing for the day's exercises. As the prisoners were all walking along, they were suddenly shocked to see Diderici as he slowly started to become transparent, and within seconds he suddenly disappeared completely. As he was disappearing, his manacles and leg irons fell to the ground. Diderici had vanished into thin air and was never seen or heard from again. The man in the green pyjamas. In April 1959, a man disappeared in unusual circumstances and started one of the most mysterious manhunts in American history. Bruce Nelson Campbell, 57, was a New England stockbroker and described as 6'4" and balding. On April 14, 1959, Bruce Campbell and his wife Mabelita left their home in Northampton, Massachusetts to visit their son in Jacksonville in west central Illinois. Their son Bruce Jr. was an assistant professor of chemistry at McMurray College in Jacksonville, and they were undertaking the journey as their son and wife had just had a new baby. The drive to Jacksonville would take them 16 hours, as the journey was over 1,000 miles. It appears that the long drive was starting to take its toll on Bruce Campbell, where he began to feel ill whilst driving. By the time they reached Jacksonville, his wife claimed that he had become confused and disoriented. His wife checked them into a motel on Walnut Street called the Sandman Hotel, where they were able to park directly outside their motel room. After receiving their room key, Bruce Campbell was immediately put to bed, where his wife then called the Dr. E.C. Bone. Dr. Bone then prescribed him medication to help him sleep, but Bruce Campbell continued to be in a state of anxiety, where he woke his wife twice as he was concerned he had not locked their vehicle. At 2:15 in the morning, his wife awoke, and as she turned to check on her husband, found that he was no longer in the bed. She first checked the bathroom, believing that would have been the most obvious place to look, but he was not there, and then checked outside where the car was still parked outside their room, and found that the car doors were securely locked. She then checked with the desk clerk on duty, but he had not seen anyone walking past the office. She then went back inside and found that his clothes were still folded, and his wallet, with all of the money inside, was on the side dresser, along with his glasses and car keys. However, what was missing was his wristwatch and his ring that he'd obviously not removed. Wherever her husband had gone, he would still have been wearing the bright green pyjamas that he'd worn to bed. Due to her husband's anxiety and disorientation, Mrs. Campbell quickly called the police. When they arrived at the motel, she described the husband as tall and balding with a slight limp, and he would have left the motel wearing only a pair of bright green pyjamas. But he could not have gone far, as his wallet containing all of his money, his shoes, his glasses and his car keys was still in the motel room. A full-scale search then ensued, but they were unable to locate her husband. Rumours then abounded where it was claimed he had faked a disappearance in order to meet up with a girlfriend who would have picked him up outside the motel. But that scenario was dismissed and did not fit with his unlikely appearance, and would have been totally out of character, and the fact that he was in town to visit his first grandson. The police searched the surrounding area and even downtown, but there was no sign of Campbell. The following morning, more information was sought, with theories of murder, suicide, and due to his confused state, they checked the hospital, local creeks, farm buildings, or he may have even fallen down a well. Jacksonville Police Chief Ike Flynn and Captain Charles Runkle employed a fixed-wing aircraft and a helicopter, but found nothing. The following day, they called in local firefighters to join the search and a boat to dredge Movestair Creek. Students from McMurray College were also enlisted to join the search, and on the third day, the entire 235-member male population of McMurray, along with the students, helped comb the area. Despite the massive search, no trace of Campbell was ever found, and Chief Flynn told the media the case was one of the most baffling mysteries that has occurred here. The search for Bruce Nelson Campbell came to be known as the Man in the Green Pyjamas and continued for weeks and even years. Mabelita Campbell went home defeated after 2 weeks of searching, but the family refused to give up hope and believed he would be found alive. In 1967, he was declared legally dead. Mrs. Campbell passed away in 2004, never knowing what had become of her husband. Today, the case still remains unsolved.